Empower Women. Welcome, everyone, to Keystone Partners Empowering Women Leaders. This is a very hot topic. We have almost 700 registrants, and our angle on this very large, what we called elephant-sized topic, is disrupting the art of empathy and authenticity. So thank you for joining us today. We have a wonderful panel lined up. For those of you that are not familiar with Keystone, my name is Kim Littlefield, and I'm actually one of the partners at the firm. And Keystone is a consulting firm. We specialize in leadership development, executive coaching, and career transitions. And we help organizations build resilience. That word is pretty common these days, but it's an important word. And the reason it's important to be resilient is we want to make sure our clients can sustain growth and make strategic investments in their employees' development at very defining moments in careers. So that's the work that we do. And the reason we're doing this workshop is we've had requests from clients over the past few months to focus a little bit more on women's issues. And it just seems to be very popular. So we might have a series here, who knows? So with us today, we have a fabulous panel, including Tama Donovan, who is the Director of Global Employee Relations at Wellington Management. So Tama, thank you for your time today. We also have Debbie Lewis, who is the Chief Human Resources Officer at Loomis Sales. Thank you, Debbie, for joining us. Darlene Sousa, who's the CHRO, Chief Human Resources Officer at South Shore Health. And Lisa Abbott, also at another large healthcare company. Lisa Abbott is the Chief Human Resources Officer at Children's Hospital. And then we thought it would be really interesting to add another perspective outside of human resources from our beloved executive coach, Shmruti Patel. Shmruti is one of our fabulous coaches. She's ICF certified. She runs her own business and partners with Keystone, but she also, I just found this out the other day, she facilitates 4 different groups for Chief, which is pretty amazing. So Chief, for those of you who are not familiar, is a very active organization for women and probably also men. So even though we're talking about women's issue, what I love to see on the invitation list is so many men signed up. So this is not only up for women, it's for everyone to be enlightened on the subject. So I think I covered everything other than the housekeeping, which is if you would like to ask a question, if you could please put that in the Q&A, that would be great, and we'll be monitoring that. We received so many questions about this topic that I don't know that we'll be able to cover them all, but we will do a follow-up email to all of the attendees and kind of double click on anything that we did not respond to today. But if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A section and we will be monitoring them. Lisa is our producer and she'll be handling that for us. So we're going to get kicked off. Tam, I'm going to pass the baton over to you. I know when we were doing the prep call, one of the things that you were super passionate about is the importance of creating an environment where employees feel safe to take risks. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about that, especially because you are in the world of employee relations day in and day out, dealing with some really tough issues. You'll probably write a book, right? And you've also been at a number of different organizations where you've probably seen it all. So why don't we start with you? Tell us a little bit more about why that's so important.
Great. Thanks, Kim. And thanks to you and to the Keystone team for giving all of us this opportunity to have a conversation about this really important topic. I'm really excited to be here. Going back to your question, I'm glad that you talked about this in terms of linking safety and taking risks. I think we've probably all been really, I don't want to say inundated, but we've certainly heard a lot about psychological safety over the past several years. The term's been around since I think the late 90s, but it's really prevalent and it's really important, and we all are and should be thinking a lot about it. But I do worry a little bit that the term psychological safety gets conflated into a simple idea of people being comfortable. And that's not really it. And I think it's really important that we talk about and think about the value proposition of psychological safety. And it's more about being comfortable or feeling that you have permission to be uncomfortable yourself and to make other people feel uncomfortable. So it's actually the opposite of sort of creating a team where everybody feels cozy and happy all the time. It's people who feel like they can take the risk of providing that tough feedback, being the dissenting voice in the room, or raising an idea that might seem wacky or like something that people won't receive really well. So that's what we need the safety for, is to make people feel like they have that permission. And going back to your question in terms of why this is important and where the value comes in, for organizations, it really is. I mean, all organizations are there to do something. For many, it's to gain market share, to make our customers happy, to thrive as businesses, to make a profit, to make money. And what this does is, if teams have psychological safety, they are the teams that are innovating. They are the teams whose processes are always improving and whose products are always improving. Those are successful teams, and it serves the bottom line. So that's the value proposition for organizations, at least as I see it. And for individuals, every one of us should want to work on a team and for a leader that makes us feel like we have permission, or we're empowered to raise our hands, to take those risks, to take on the project that nobody else is really interested in, to admit when, oh my gosh, this project did not go the way I wanted to. I think I've failed, and here's how I'm going to fix it. To speak up, and you mentioned I'm in employee relations. Speaking up is core to everything I try to do every day in my job, and it's all of those things that help us as individuals to grow and succeed and be successful in our careers. So this idea of safety is really important, but I think it's important to keep in mind why it's so important. So I hope that answers that question a bit, Kim.
The other thing you mentioned the other day was, along with this feeling of safety, that you could take a risk and make a mistake, and you're not going to lose your job over it, or you're not going to be in a situation where you disrupt or impair the relationship. You talked about the building of relationships and how important that is. Can you say a little bit more about that? Because in your role in employee relations, I'm sure there's some disconnects that you're
Yeah.
dealing with.
Yeah, I think that this idea of safety comes down very much to relationships, and every relationship you have in your life is going to be different, but the relationships you have at work, the really important things are trusting the people around you, that they're going to do what they say they're going to do, and that they're going to tell you when you're not doing the right thing, or when there's something you're doing that you could get better at. And I think that's really the core of building these trusting relationships. And as you build the relationships, you get to know more about each other, and that's where that element of feeling really cared for, which is also very important. But it's kind of a different slice of that when it comes to work, and making sure that you've got the best relationships you can surrounding you.
Thanks, Tana. It's interesting, the word trust came up, and I know when we were doing our planning meeting, that seemed to kind of be the umbrella over all of these issues, regardless of whether they're female issues or otherwise. I know, Debbie, you have a model that you shared with us that you thought was really powerful. You had attended a workshop on it. You want to give us a little bit of background on that, a trust model?
Sure, happy to. There are 4 components. And first of all, I come to a place of logic and common sense, and I like things that are very simple. And this was a very simple model, and it has resonated with me for the few years that I've known about it. The 4 components: one would be competence, which we just talked about. You want to see someone demonstrate that they can actually do what they say they can do, that you need to see it to believe it. Reliability: what someone says they're going to do, they actually do it, and when they say they're going to do it. That's another very big component. And sincerity: being transparent, no hidden agenda on your parts, so that people feel that there's full honesty there. And then empathy: if you demonstrate that what's important to someone else is also important to you, that builds a lot of trust as well.
So I know you're relatively new in your role as a CHRO, although you've been in HR for years. Can you give us some examples of how you've applied that model at Loomis Sales?
Sure, absolutely. I think we all have people that we trust more than others, and sometimes it's hard to pinpoint what it is. that makes us not trust someone. And for me, I was struggling with a colleague that a former colleague that I used to work with, and I couldn't quite figure it out. But when I applied this model, I realized that part of what we didn't have with each other was the transparency piece, being fully sincere. And the example I'll share is that she was a colleague. She did not report to me, but I was receiving a lot of complaints about a lack of follow through and not getting things done in a timely manner. And it's a little bit harder when it's a peer colleague or slightly junior maybe, but not a direct report. If it's a direct report, it's easy to know what to do. You address it very, very directly. With this particular situation, I felt a little bit protective of her. I didn't necessarily want to let her know that there were complaints. So I took a different approach. I tried to insert myself to get the task done, to make sure that the employee who was coming forward got done whatever it is that they needed. And I thought that was the right thing to do at the time. But I can see now it wasn't very effective because I wasn't being fully transparent with her about the larger issue. And that didn't give her the full information in order to make more positive, long-term, ongoing changes. So I felt I was doing the right thing at the time, but it worked much better when I did provide more information and more detail. And I did it in a very compassionate way because I was very well intended. I wanted her to succeed, and giving her the full information that, people are complaining. Is there something that we can do to prevent this from happening in the future, to help and support you? So that was definitely a better approach to take. And I try to do that more and more with the people that I work with.
That word compassion has been popping up a lot lately, and it's really in the model there with the sincerity and the empathy. But sometimes I think people don't put the two together, the business world and compassion. So how have you been able to sort of instill that at Loomis with senior leadership? Obviously you're embracing it, but how do you get other senior leaders to embrace compassion?
I think it's a matter, I always talk about what you do and how you do it. And compassion comes in the how. You can deliver a message in a variety of ways, and some are going to be more effective than others. So I do a lot of coaching individually with managers and with employees on how to communicate tough messages. I try to demonstrate that myself along the way as well. And so I think it's just living it every day and doing what you're asking other people to do.
Pam, I want to just go back to you for a minute because of your role in employee relations, compassion. You had mentioned it briefly, but is there any words of wisdom that you could share to the HR leaders that are on this call today about compassion when you're dealing with those difficult employee relations issues?
I guess, Kim, that just building on what Debbie was saying, I think it is a lot about that authenticity in terms of compassion. And when you're trying to tell someone something that's hard, or you're trying to have a conversation that's a really difficult conversation, the nicer or the softer you try to be in having that conversation, the harder it is for the person to hear you, take the steps they need to take, and really understand what it is you're trying to say. So, sort of, it doesn't resonate immediately, but being direct is compassionate, and you can be direct and share difficult news or information or ask tough questions in a way that's respectful, empathetic, but also really doesn't beat around the bush and isn't sort of that feedback sandwich kind of dynamic. And so that's it's compassion, but it's really direct compassion, and that's what people need.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Darlene, I'm going to swing it over to you on this theme of compassion. When we were talking in the prep call, you were so passionate about how we can support each other as female leaders, whether we're already in a leadership role or aspiring to be in a leadership role. You had talked about networking and mentoring and how that's a way of showing compassion. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Thank you, Kim. I do think what of critical importance is when we're talking about trust, we're talking about respect, and we're talking about being direct. We need to come forward and be our authentic self. And that starts with trusting ourselves. And I do think when we look at, and one of my favorite people to listen to and blog is Brene Brown, and one of her first articles or TED Talks was about the man in the arena and who are your biggest critics. And when you're in the arena and you're scarred and you look up, who is there to support you? And sometimes, and is it just the critics? Or are you bringing your best friends? Or are you bringing other people? And it's very important for us, especially as women, to be our best friends, because we are very critical of ourselves. And a lot of times we try to get the reinforcement extrinsically versus intrinsically, and how we can continue to make sure we're caring for ourselves and having self-care. And part of that, and I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth for a moment, you can be too intrinsically involved and follow that loop of, you know, should I have done that? Am I good enough? Am I being heard? Am I being listened to? And I do think it's really important for women leaders to know that you're not alone and that there are people out there to support you. And what you're feeling is not atypical. And the work environment is something that we need to continue to look at, and how we promote it to be open, to be fair, and to be flexible enough so that we as women can balance our lives and can have it all. We can't have it all at one time, right? Something has to give and something has to move, but it's really important to have the conversations. And I have been, knowing that we were going to have this conversation today and be part of this panel today, I've engaged in conversations with a lot of female leaders and asking them, how is the work environment for you these days? How was the working environment for you as a female leader? And did you feel like your voice was heard? Did you feel you were valued by your other colleagues? And I am fascinated, Kim, by the amount of people, as soon as the question leaves my lips, have a story to tell me that happened 30 seconds ago, 10 minutes ago, 20 years ago. And we keep that inside and accept that it's okay. What is accepted is repeated. And sometimes people just don't know. So to Tama's point, we can be direct and open and support those conversations with people, but we need to keep that door open. And I think we need to do that through networking with our peers, networking with our colleagues. I do think there's typically, if I keep my nose to the grindstone, continue to move forward, opportunity is going to knock. Opportunity may knock, but you need the network, you need the relationships, you need the resources to support you, to know, okay, it's not just me. Other people are going through this. And how can we have that collaborative conversation on how we do better? Because we need to come forward with the solutions to improve the working environment and to support one another. And what are we doing, either informally or formally, to mentor our colleagues within our own organization, within our own walls, or companies and outside that. But it starts with us. It really does. I think that there's no cavalry coming. We're it. And how are we going to support each other today and in the future? Because it does need to change, but we need to know and we need to ask for what we want to be different.
Thank you. You know, one of the things that hit me when we were coming up with this topic, I'm just going to be real with everyone. Seriously, we're still talking about
Yes.
women's issues.
Yes.
We have a 35-year plus career. It was the same topic in my early 20s, and now I'm in my late 50s, and we're still talking about this. I shake my head sometimes. And Darlene, you called it out, and you said there's still gender inequity and more as you rise up. So can you talk a little bit
Yes.
about, and all of you feel free to chime in on this, because I was excited about this today, but a little sad that we had to have this topic. If I'm being real, right?
Very much so, Kim, and I give you applaud you for saying that, because it is there. And I'll give a recent example, and I wouldn't have done this a year ago, or where I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues, provided feedback on what I thought the direction we should go. And he said the exact same thing I just said, changed it up a little bit, and presented it as a new concept. And it was a small group, and I was comfortable with this gentleman, and this peer, and I actually would say he's a friend. And I looked at him and I said, thank you for mansplaining that to me. I
Mansplaining, yes.
truly appreciate that. And he cracked up, because I mean, I wouldn't offer that to every conversation within the workplace, but he laughed, and you look and say, oh my gosh, you laughed? He laughed because he's like, Darlene, that is the funniest thing I have heard all month. And I'm like, he thinks that's funny. Okay. He goes, because you're right. And
Mhm.
what else am I going to do but laugh? But I am so sorry. And he looked and he goes, I get it. And sometimes I just don't think people know how they may be coming across. But the struggles I find on a fairly regular basis is either I say something and something comes across, or it's the terminology is changed and presented. And if a male colleague says it, it's a great idea. But did I say that 15 or 20 minutes ago? And so then I'm working on, okay, maybe I'm not clear. How do I present differently? But when I talk to female colleagues, not here, across the continuum, there's that common trend or thread. So those are some of the challenges that that I find on a regular basis, that I'm trying to work through with the team, but making people aware.
Thank you. Lisa, I've got a question that's perfect segue into you that just popped in here, because I know you're going to talk about this, but the question is, how do you handle management that welcome feedback and encourage the workplace being a safe space, in quotes, while increasingly being less and less transparent over time? So, excuse me, Lisa, you were going to talk about, because you have the role at a CHRO at Children's Hospital, how you've had to build organizational transparency and trust. So could you take that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to, and thanks for being here. I love this conversation, and am grateful to be a part of it. So I've been here at Children's for about a year and a half. My primary focus in the 20 plus years I've been in the healthcare industry is on HR transformation, and not unique to healthcare, and somewhat ubiquitous in terms of HR organizations. We often find HR functions uninvested or underinvested in, and so we're playing catch up in this industry. When I arrived here about 18 months ago, it was exactly that. We're very present and forward facing and blue chip when it comes to our patient care. But I wonder how the lights come on when the mice have chewed up the wiring harness underneath the hood of the car. So as HR transformation unfolds, we have a commitment to talk about the why often and regularly, and I've committed to that, and have encouraged my team to really be sure that in every instance of change, and Darlene, you can speak to this as well as I can, in what's very historically rigid and entrenched, the structure of healthcare, change is really hard. Any kind of change is really hard, but we've got to really modernize our workforce, and we've got to appreciate that the workers that we're attracting now want something very different. Kim, I too, shake my head occasionally around these conversations, but I think the emerging generations are going to demand that there's a much different level of conversation and transparency that goes on. So to specifically address the question, I think it's consistency. Debbie talked about this, Tama talked about this. It's consistency over and over again, reliability, do what you say what you do. That's what creates credibility. And I find that those who deviate from their authentic self and being reliable and credible and consistent are those with whom people have less trust. And so there are always things that we aren't going to be able to talk about as executives. There are always going to be things that need to be, there needs to be a moratorium on open and transparent conversation until things are ready to be discussed publicly and more openly. I say that. I say, I'll tell you what I know. I'll tell you, what I can tell you. And if I can't answer your question, I will also tell you that, and I'll try to help you understand why. So, I think also, Tama, you touched on this, and I want to make mention of it. This concept of the conversation sandwich, right? Lead with something nice, give somebody feedback, and end with something nice. Maybe not. I think the more important point is to be direct. Is to be empathetic. For those of you who have never seen the Cleveland Clinic empathy video, I would strongly urge you Google. It'll come right up. It's a healthcare video, but it is representative of the fact that we all bring somebody to work each and every day, right? It might be our best self. It may not be our very best self. And there's often reasons for that. But this ability to be able to say, I need to offer you some feedback. It may not feel good, but I offer it in the interest that I care about you, and I want you to know, and I want you to be better. We can do that. We don't have to be harsh. We don't have to be mean. But I think the more direct we are and the less we beat around the bush, the more people can appreciate what we're trying to say, and the fact that we say it because we care. We want people to be better and to grow and to learn. So I think this notion of transparency, as much as we can, as routinely as we can, as reliably as we can, that builds credibility. It builds trust, and it builds reputational, realistic expectations of who we are in our organization. So I'll turn it back to you, Kim.
Thank you so much. So any of you can answer this. I think it's based on just this overall dialogue, but one of the attendees asked, can any of you speak to the layer of generational tension that affects younger women? In my experience, there's still a stigma of being a millennial, even though the oldest ones of us are around 40 and have earned significant responsibilities. So the dynamics beyond mansplaining to the level of being seen as so much younger and in need of being taught, and how do we handle that? Who would like to take that one? We right now have, some will say 4 generations in the workforce. Technically, there's 5 generations. And I think many of us still think of millennials as being quite young, but it's a really good point, Amanda. So thank you for pointing that out.
So I can take a first crack at that, Kim. I think that this is where those trusting relationships come in. And so if you're feeling that dynamic, and you can talk it over with your manager or with a trusted colleague who's often in meetings with you, and you can sort of manufacture the opportunity to disprove that perception, and maybe be the one that explains things or be the person that takes the lead. That can help to start to alleviate that. I also think there's nothing, every situation is different, and calling something out in the middle of a meeting sometimes is not the most constructive thing to do. But going to the person who did it, a lot of the time people are not being malicious. They do not intend to be landing in the way that they're landing, and going to somebody and saying, I wanted to tell you that when you rephrase everything I say, it makes me feel as though you're not treating me as a credible resource. What can we do to change that? So it doesn't necessarily have to be about assigning blame for a behavior, but it can be about how do we do this better? because this is how it's impacting me. So those are just a couple of thoughts in terms of how to do that. And I also want to say, I understand, I hear about that dynamic a fair bit. And for whatever reason, millennials seem to be the group that people are really comfortable talking about in that way. And it's not fair. This is something that needs to get some airtime to get us all over it as well.
Thank you, Tama. Who else would like to comment on the generational aspect with millennials? Debbie?
Well, just more generally than generational, I think it's sometimes the words that we use. So I have a lot of people come, oh, I don't like confrontation. I don't want to confront that person. If you think of it as confrontation, yeah, that's an intimidating thing to think about. But if you change the words around it, and directness and honesty and well-intended to let the person know how they've landed, how they're being perceived by you, could be others as well. So you're making them aware of something. Darlene's example of the mansplainer who had no idea he was doing it is probably much more aware now. And it was done in it was a comedy way, but it worked. And it's good that he had that reaction, I think. So you may not get the harsh reaction that you're anticipating when you bring something up. So that might be refreshing for you, give you more bravery to do it going forward.
Yeah, I think even the word conflict, we hear it, it's like, ooh, you just all of a sudden you have a visceral reaction and it's negative, right? So if you can turn it around in your mind. Darlene, did you want to make a comment on this question?
I do. And I the millennial piece is it's not fair. And I understand that. My niece is an IP litigator. She's a millennial, and she was litigating a very large case with one of the partners in a, I would say, a more progressive law firm. And they were walking, they met for dinner to do some pre-work for the litigation the next morning. And he mentioned to her, this goes back to kind of wanting to educate. And the partner said to her, I just want to make sure that you're aware tomorrow that you need to wear a suit. And she said, yes, thank you very much. I happened to, I wasn't planning on wearing my tennis gear. And he looked at her and he goes, oh my gosh, I'm really, really sorry. I can't believe that I just said that to you. I should have never have said that to you. Of course, you know that you would need to wear a suit. But it goes back to coming across like, wasn't rude, but was direct in the response, because how else do you respond to a comment like that? But that was just an informal conversation he had. But, you could see that as how that could be offensive, and also how it could be, coming across as, I need to educate you on how to present in a courtroom.
Yeah, that's a great example. There's another comment and question in the chat. Thanks for the point made, Darlene. When faced with that kind of obstacle where your ideas were basically reiterated by a man and all of a sudden heard, what should we do when we have that type of situation happen? I found myself in that situation multiple times, but not sure what would be the meaningful way to proceed and still hope to improve and hope for a better tomorrow. So Darlene, you want to start with that one, then we'll go over to, I want to hear from Shmudi as well on this, because she's coaching so many generations in her practice.
Oh, sure. So I asked that question to a retired CEO who's a board member of us yesterday, for us yesterday, how, her experience and how she handled that. And she said, she gave me some great advice yesterday. And one of the things she said is, I compound off of comment. So when somebody says something, I would say, bouncing off of what I said earlier, and then what John clarified, there is another component I would like to add. And so you're not offending John. You're making sure the conversation or the information is shared, that the idea came from you, that John added to it, but there was a piece missing that you want to close out. And I think that's really important, especially for those of us that have the quick ideas, because sometimes we're the first one to share it, and then it has to resonate with people for a while, and then it may come back into the conversation, and it may be, oh, wait a minute, he or she just stole my, or they just took my idea, but it just needed to possibly process. So always circling back and saying, bouncing off, or bringing this back, or I just want to elaborate on my initial idea or feedback.
Thank you. I'd like to hear other thoughts on how to deal. There's another comment. Thank you, Christine. Do you have suggestions on how to point out that your ideas were taken when you didn't realize it until after the meeting ends? So Shmuti, you've been coaching for years. Anything you'd like to add on this theme that we're on right now?
Yes, first of all, such amazing insights from all the women. Thank you very much for all the insights. On that last point that Darlene just made, I love that idea of self-advocating in the way that you've just described. I would also add that there's another component, again, on a previous point that you were making around allyship and mentorship for women, which is amplifying the voices of other women. So if you see that another woman's idea has been taken in the moment, why not amplify that voice and say, oh, didn't Sarah just say that? Or whatever that might be. And so that's another technique to just sort of deal with some of that that happens.
Thanks, Shmuti. Anybody else want to comment? There's been a couple questions in the Q&A in the chat about when a woman feels like her idea was taken or not heard, but then all of a sudden somebody else brought it up and it's implemented. Lisa?
I would love to just offer generally, and we're touching on it, but I would like to say directly, we know this language, but most people don't. Debbie, you talked about the example where somebody said, I'm conflict averse, and we immediately think that we're going to say something bad and something, unfavorable, when in fact, sometimes it's the words and the language that we choose. So I often will help dress rehearse, right? Role play with people who come to me and say, had this difficult time. I wasn't sure what to say, and try to teach them some simple sound bites to have in the toolkit where they can just know it's very simple. And I love the idea, Shmuti, about this sort of lifting one another up and saying, Darlene, I think that was a great reframing of what Darlene just said. Or, maybe you don't realize that your tone was elevated, and I'm sorry if that created, my comment created that tone in you. So just sort of practicing language so that we've got something to say when we find ourselves in a situation, particularly if it's a situation where it's a routinized behavior, something we see often in another person, because then we know that that person is going to say something that's going to, maybe not land well in a public forum, and doesn't have to be a controversial comment. And then the ability to take it offline so that we're not calling somebody out in a publicly humiliating kind of way, just to say, you didn't bring your very best self to that meeting. And, I know that you probably didn't realize that your tone was a little loud, or your comment didn't land quite the way you probably hoped it would. And so this notion of practicing language, especially when we know who the frequent flyers are. And I love some of the feedback. Darlene, I'll just quickly anecdotally, if I might, Kim, I was in IT before I was in HR, and many, many, many decades ago, I worked, goes to the audience question about, or comment about dress. This was not in the 1950s. This is in the late 1990s and early 2000s. I worked for an IT company. And the first day I was signing up for my benefits, the finance person, I worked in IT. I couldn't spell HR then. The person who helped me with my benefits said, were you told about the dress code? And I said, what dress code? And they said, women don't wear pants here. And I started to laugh because I didn't know what else to do. I'm running Cat5 cable in the ceiling and crawling under people's desks, fixing their computers. I didn't know what to do. And she said, is that going to be a problem? And I said, yeah, it's a big problem. And, you know, I didn't last there very long because it was a really big problem. And so I didn't have language then to really know what to do. Laughter is one of my response mechanisms. But I look back on that time and think about it and think about moving forward and creating a vocabulary where I've been able to actually address people that have done all the things that you're describing. And so I think practicing that is a really helpful, can be a really helpful, you know, a skill set to build out.
I love that. A dress
I add
rehearsal,
one?
if you will. Who's going to comment? I'm sorry.
Sorry, can I add
Yes,
to that?
please, Smriti.
Yeah, Lisa, I think that's an absolutely excellent point. So one of the things that you might want to think about as well in general for everyone is to actually create a list of phrases that you can respond with. Because what happens is that when we're in a difficult situation, we often don't know how to respond. And so I love the term the frequent flyers. So if you're familiar with the kinds of comments that certain people might be making, have those comments ready. That's the first thing. The second thing is, in the interest of directness, it's okay to say, oh, I think I just said that. Let me rephrase it again. So in the interest of directness, again, it's okay to say that, to rephrase that, or to put it like that. And the third thing that the point that Lisa is making is so critical and so important. It is about your communication style. So the one thing as a coach that I have worked with people on for years and years and years, including myself, and it's the one area that we never stop working on, it is how we become more sophisticated in the way that we communicate. So there are nuances that change at every single level. So as soon as you become a CEO or even before, you have to know how to communicate with the board. That's a very different type of nuanced communication that you have to have, a different type of nuanced reading of the room that you have to have as well. So one thing that I would encourage everyone to do is to constantly be working on your communication style, which includes not only the way that you are articulating information, but also paying attention to how others are articulating information, watching, observing, learning, listening. But most importantly, how are you reading another person and how are you reading a room? Because reading a room becomes absolutely critical the higher you rise as a leader.
Really, really good points, Smriti. And my takeaway from what you just said is I love how humble you are. You're still fine-tuning this for yourself, and you're a coach. Because we grow every day in every setting that we're in. So thank you. There's a comment from another coach on our team in the chat, which is, as an executive coach, a challenge I often see for senior women leaders is that the behaviors that are acceptable or even lauded in men are often not seen as acceptable in women. Do you find that, Smriti?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And so that's something that many of my clients will talk to me about. And there are two things around that. One is that in a coaching engagement, it becomes a safe space to be able to talk about that openly and say, this is what has happened. And we can come up with tactics on how we want to deal with things as well. But the one thing that Kim, I think you know, I have a very direct communication style. So one thing that I will also tell my clients is that we can look at how somebody else is behaving and getting away with it. Or we can also look at what is your leadership style. How are you authentically going to be the leader that you want to be? It doesn't mean ignoring any of this, but it does mean remaining true to who you are, remaining authentic to who you are. And for that, you have to have a very clear understanding of your values. You have to have a very clear understanding of what your moral compass is. And it's interesting because many times when I have asked clients what their values are, they can often tell me what the values of the organization are, but it's often very difficult to articulate what our own values are. And that's not something we come up with a piece of paper and pen. Yeah, we do a brainstorming exercise around that, but there's a much more involved way that we can go towards understanding what our values are. One, it's our moral compass. But secondly, what is so important is that if we know what our values are, we understand why we are in conflict with other people. Conflict is very natural, but it is usually when one of our values or several of our values have been transgressed upon that we are in conflict with another person, quietly or loudly, it doesn't matter. And that allows us to name what it is. And therefore, that allows us to then think about how we want to deal with it.
The other thing you pointed out when we were doing the prep session, Shmuti, is that, you know, once you have an understanding of the environment you're in and what your moral compass is, that gives you a better sense of what your leadership style is, or you're aspiring for it to be, right? If you're rising up the ladder. Can you comment on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so again, it is the understanding what your own authentic leadership style is composed of both what your values are, but also understanding what your skills are. So it's about what am I good at? What am I not so good at? But also understanding what am I good at, but I don't like to do? What am I good, or what am I not good at and don't like to do at all either? It's that third one which can become very interesting for us because it's something that we can often be pulled by into an organization to do more of. You're good at this, but you don't necessarily like it. And so all of those go into just creating a bigger picture of how do we want to show up as a leader from a skill perspective, also from a values perspective. And then, as all of the ladies have spoken about as well, the compassion and the empathy piece. Emotional intelligence is extremely important for leadership.
Any comments, ladies, on what Shmuti's had to say about, you know, your authentic leadership style and understanding the environment you're in? Lisa.
Would love to just, I appreciate that so much. And I think it's really important as we think about who we are and we reflect and so forth. Sometimes we find ourselves in environments that are inconsistent with our values. And we have to decide what we're going to do with that. So at the IT company that I referenced, it was inconsistent with my values that I was going to dress in such a way that felt really incongruous with the job I needed to do. And the way it was handled at the leadership level wasn't something I felt like I could adapt and be part of. And so I left. I made the choice to leave. And so I think we have to sort of do this 360-degree assessment of, am I in an organization? Am I working with people? Am I on a team that allows me to bring forward my very best self in a way that is authentic and consistent with who I want to be? And I think this notion of self-reflection and consistent growth of self is also really important. So sometimes we find ourselves in an environment where we have to make tough decisions about whether we stay or whether we go. And just putting that out there as we all have options, right? And we have to evaluate what's gonna bring us the most professional satisfaction.
I have a question for all of you that's in the chat. What advice do you have for women leaders who are getting feedback that they are too direct or aggressive when their behavior is both acceptable and even encouraged by men?
Can you repeat that one more time?
Sure.
Thank you.
Shruti, we'll go over to you. So the question is, what advice do you have for women leaders who are getting feedback that they are too direct or aggressive when their behavior is both acceptable and even encouraged by men?
So Mike, my first question would be, who is the feedback coming from? Because not all feedback is equal.
That's a good point. Other comments? Tama?
I think I would encourage sort of the recipient of that feedback to get really specific, both with themselves, what is making me think that this is encouraged in men? What are some examples? Where have I seen this encouraged? Just to make sure you're not actually bringing your own assumptions into how you're hearing the feedback. And then I would get really specific with the person giving you the feedback, and maybe even give some examples of where you've seen this exact behavior in others, and really ask them to be clear with you about what is different in how I'm delivering my messages versus how others are, and really sort of force them to give you really specific, detailed information, and they might realize this isn't valid. And you might realize that there's something about the way you are speaking or delivering messages that you could work on. This is back to Shruti's point, that you could continue to improve your communication style. So I would, get really curious when you hear that, and don't just say thank you very much.
Yeah,
Feedback is a gift, but you deserve to understand the feedback.
I love it. Get very curious. Other comments, ladies?
Tim, can I just make a quick
Sure.
point just around the direct feedback piece as well, because we've talked a lot about it, and I think it's very, very important. I very much agree with the notion that it's better to be very clear in how we're communicating the feedback, and we're providing feedback directly. I agree with all of those things, but I think there's an important first step that needs to occur, and that is to understand when you are going to give the feedback to the individual, what is the state of the mind of the person that you're going to give that feedback to? So it's important to understand how, because the reason for that is because you want to always communicate in a way that the other person is going to receive the communication. So if the person who you're going to deliver the feedback to has had a bad day, your feedback is going to land in a very different way. If the person is having challenges at home, for example, that may explain what is going on, and you might need to reconsider the kind of feedback that you're giving. So that ties in with compassion as well. And I think it's a very important first step that we often forget. And often people who are given feedback that you're too direct, it's because they often haven't, again, read the room or read the individual, asked those questions around what's the state of mind before I'm going to communicate this difficult message that I want to share with you.
That's great. Thank you. So I'm looking at the time. Excuse me. I'm looking at the time, ladies. I want to leave time to finish up going through these questions. This is obviously a very lively discussion, and we could go any different ways with this empathy and authenticity. And thank you all for contributing to the chat and the Q&A. I'd love for you, we'll do a lightning round of what's a one-line takeaway of what you would like people to remember from our hour together today. So Debbie, I'm going to go over to you because you're first in my lineup here.
Sure. I think for me, it's you can be direct and compassionate at the same time. They're not mutually exclusive.
That's a great one. Tama?
I agree with Debbie's, but I would also say I've heard a lot today, and particularly in the comments, about assuming best intent. And that's a great thing to do. It's great to have a model to sort of diffuse situations as they're happening. But if they're happening a lot and it's the same person and it's the same type of behavior, it's no longer on you to assume best intent, and it's time to have that direct conversation. So, don't turn yourself into a pretzel to work around, an issue that is coming up again and again.
Thanks, Tama. Darlene?
I would say support each other, come from a place of understanding, listen to understand, know your audience, and be your best self.
So well said. So well said. Lisa?
I would just say, don't be afraid of failure. Failure can be the very best instructor. Fail fast, fail forward, and learn and grow.
Learn from our mistakes.
Indeed.
Shruti?
Amazing panel, and thank you for hosting, Kim. My one takeaway would be, or one thing that I would say is keep refining your communication.
Wonderful. So we have about 5 minutes left. If there's other questions in the Q&A, I know we've got one here back to the millennial and Gen Z, different generations in the workforce. So whoever wants to take this one, how can millennial and Gen Z women navigate the dual challenges of not being taken seriously due to their age and also facing competitive dynamics from other women in the workplace? What strategies can be employed to foster empathy and authenticity among female colleagues, breaking down these barriers?
I think that's a whole other panel, isn't it?
It
Kim?
sure is. I think we've got a series here, like I said, right? But any quick thoughts on that? It's a big question. So any quick one-liners?
I think that's where the trusting relationships comes in. You know, that's when you want to, I heard something the other day. Someone famous said that oh, I don't like that person. That means I need to get to know them better. And I think that that's really powerful. And maybe if more of us took that approach when we're having, you know, some unsaid conflict, we would all be supporting each other more.
That's very powerful. I like that. Other comments, Darlene?
I would say continue to be your best self, prepare as you would prepare, communicate in a manner that's professional, authentic, and direct, and ask questions, and ask clarifying questions on intent when you need to do so. And I do think that'll help navigate those waters, but continue to be you and continue to drive forward. And I will make a commitment to the millennials that I will continue, because I'm not one, just in case you were wondering. I will continue to drive the path forward for you. I haven't done a good enough job with that. And I will continue to do that to make the transition better for the next generation of leaders.
Thank you. And Shruti, as a coach, love to hear your thoughts.
I think it's all been very well said. I think the one thing I'm just thinking back to my lawyer days and working in an area of the law which was dominated by people who were a lot older than me. So I did all the tricks, all the physical tricks, wearing my glasses, wearing long skirts, things like that. I'm not suggesting that that's what people should do, but what I also did do was I lent very heavily on my expertise. And so just when you can demonstrate that you are the expert in the room over and over again, it finally begins to drip down, I think.
Well, ladies, I can't thank you enough for volunteering your time. You're all very, very busy, and we know that you gave of yourself for this, not only for this 1 hour today, but also the preparation. So thank you. You're all so amazing, and we're grateful that you are part of our community here at Keystone. There are many questions that we did not have the opportunity to get to today, but we will be following up, as we said earlier, with an email to double-click on any of these questions and offer further responses. We are here to support you and each other. And as we've all said, it's all about networking and mentoring and paying it forward and taking care of us, whether we're female, male, or otherwise. We're all here to support each other and pay it forward. So thank you so much. Really appreciate your time today, ladies. Thank you very much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye.
Kim.
Thank you.